Stay in Washington with correspondent Fraser Jackson. They're firing on all cylinders where you are. And with Venezuela, what's happening there? Donald Trump's Truth Social post overnight saying that the U.S. would be using what he claims to be 30 to 50 million barrels of Venezuelan crude that's been seized. And now the breaking news of these two ships seized, one in the Caribbean and the other in the North Atlantic.
Yeah, basically, the big news, really, that one in the North Atlantic, that ship has been tracked for over a month by U.S. authorities. They first tried to apprehend it, but ultimately they have now succeeded a month later in boarding and seizing that tanker, which has been linked to the Venezuelan oil shadow fleet. Now, this vessel was initially called the Bella 1. It was believed to be heading towards Venezuela a month ago when they tried to intercept it initially, but it has since changed its name to Marinera and its flag from Guyana to Russia. Now, the tanker basically escaped that naval blockade that is existing in the Caribbean and has been pursued by US ships ever since. Russia even sent ships and a submarine to escort the vessel for the rest of its journey, but the US Coast Guard ultimately managed to board the ship before they arrived. The vessel also currently located between Iceland and the British Isles, around 200 miles or so southeast of Iceland. And of course, that ship standing accused of breaking US sanctions and shipping Iranian oil, although, like I said, it's also been historically transporting Venezuelan crude oil, but reports do say that it is empty at the moment. That second tanker, though, also seized, was in the Caribbean, the Sophia, a stateless tanker, as we just heard from Caroline Levitt, that she says was conducting illicit activities. The Sophia being escorted also to the United States. We just heard from the press secretary there as well, as part of the US's Operation Southern Spear. Now, we've heard from other officials as well. Pete Hegseth calling the blockade of sanctioned and illicit Venezuela oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. And it's important because this is really part of the United States' tactic to put a financial squeeze on Venezuela, which they believe will bring the Venezuelan interim president to the table and force her and the regime that she now presides over into the US's way of thinking. And there are already some signs that that is starting to bear some fruit.
Stay with us, Fraser, because we're going to cross to Birmingham in England. Stephen Wolff, Professor of International Security at the University of Birmingham. Thank you for joining us here on France 24.
Hello.
The day began with the Wall Street Journal reporting a Russian submarine approaching what had been the Bella 1, what is now the Marinera, this shadow tanker that was purportedly heading towards the Russian port of Murmansk in the Arctic. And yet the seizure here by the U.S. Coast Guard, your thoughts?
Well, I think the seizure and the approach of the Russian submarine are clearly connected in time. I think that was probably the last moment that the U.S. could move relatively safely before Russia would have more of its own naval assets in the area. As you can see on the map, there obviously also it's quite conveniently located relatively close to one of the key transatlantic allies of the United States, the United Kingdom, who have given some operational support to this seizure of this tanker that's clearly been violating long-standing U.S. sanctions. So from that perspective, it's an escalation, but it's probably not as bad an escalation as it would have been had the seizure happened later in the presence, potentially, of more Russian naval assets in the area.
Right now, the Russian reaction is talking about violations, but it's relatively understated. It's early days. All we have are communiques on the part of Moscow. In the longer term, how do you see Vladimir Putin reacting?
Well, I think what it clearly indicates to Vladimir Putin is that if push comes to shove, the US under President Trump will do whatever Trump and his close team feel to be in the best of US interests, and that there's very little that the Russians actually can do. I mean, we have seen that over the developments in Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela clearly one of if not the most important allies of Russia in Latin America. Trump went in, abducted Maduro, and all the Russians could do was issue furious statements of protest. Same thing we are seeing now with this tanker again. I mean, in the long run, there is probably going to be further escalation of these types of actions, but I don't really see much leverage that Russia has here at the moment to really contain these clear attempts and successful attempts of the US reasserting its dominance in the Western Hemisphere and beyond.
And Stefan, clear this up for our viewers because it's confusing. Even in that press conference we just heard from the White House, on the one hand, as you say, showing firmness when it comes to Russia and China. On the other, keeping on the table the possibility of a military action against a NATO ally, Denmark, when it comes to Greenland. At the end of the day, which side is the United States on?
Well, I think if you asked that either the White House press secretary or the president himself, he would say they are on the side of the US. So it's clearly an America first policy, and that at times has these very confusing and not very logical moves. On the one hand, putting very clear pressure on Russia and China by basically destroying their foothold in Latin America, or one part of their foothold in Latin America. On the other hand, also not shying away to say, actually, well, this is the Western Hemisphere and Greenland is part of the Western Hemisphere, so we want Greenland as well. So I think from that perspective, this is not, certainly from a European perspective, a very coherent policy of the administration here. But I also think we should not overstate at the moment the likelihood of an actual military mission by the United States to take over Greenland. I think Secretary of State Mario Rubio was very clear this morning, and as has been reported also in his comments to leaders of the US Congress, that the military option is really off the table. I think that Trump still talks about it is very much meant to put pressure on the Europeans to come to some kind of deal that he would like to make over Greenland.
And let me bring in on this our correspondent there in Washington. Fraser Jackson, we're hearing dissenting voices, even the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who's pushing back a little bit on the limits of America First in this case.
Yeah, I think, there's a certain line that some Republicans are not willing to cross. And, there is concern that this will escalate and bring the US into a more direct conflict with people who are supposed to be, American allies and very close allies of the United States. It's interesting. I've been, obviously this has been talked about for months now, but has really kind of escalated in the course of the last couple of days. I've been speaking to a couple of sources over the course of the last 24 hours or so, and some of them are very worried and see this as a very legitimate threat, and also listen to the words of Marco Rubio, who just in the press conference on Sunday, when we heard about this operation in Venezuela, Marco Rubio said that people need to learn that the United States president is not joking and is serious when he says things. But I've also spoken to other sources who believe that the Europeans are playing this completely incorrectly and kind of falling into Donald Trump's trap here. And if anything, they're worried that what will end up happening is the Europeans will end up painting Donald Trump into a corner where his only way out of it is to use military force because of the rhetoric that Europe has been pushing forward and effectively calling Donald Trump's bluff. So, there are a couple of ways that this could go, and I thought that was a very interesting take from this source. But it is a legitimate concern for the Europeans, of course, who've said that the only people who can dictate the future of Greenland are the people in Greenland itself and of course, Denmark as well.
Yeah, we heard from the White House press secretary earlier. Let's listen to what the U.S. Secretary of State had to say. Marco Rubio on Capitol Hill before speaking with lawmakers.
U.S. intent to buy Greenland. Can you clarify your comments to lawmakers this week?
Well, that's always been the president's intent from the very beginning. He said it very early on. I mean, this is not new. He talked about it in his first term, and he's not the first U.S. president that has examined or looked at how could we acquire Greenland. There's an interest there. But so I just reminded them of the fact that not only did Truman want to do it, but President Trump's been talking about this since his first term.
We're joined by Philip Turle from our International Affairs Desk, who's been monitoring reaction out of Denmark, of course. Philip, there's going to be, Marco Rubio announced it, a meeting taking place with the Danes. This is something Copenhagen had requested. You heard Fraser saying how some people think the Europeans are playing this wrong. What's the view from Denmark on this?
I don't think that the Danes think that they are playing this wrongly. They say that they have the control of Denmark. They are not willing to hand that over to the United States. They're not willing to sell Greenland to the United States either. And that's the end of the story. I think they've been asking, I think there is definitely worry in Denmark itself about military action and what would happen. I think the news that Marco Rubio is going to meet with Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the foreign minister of Denmark, next week is going to come as a relief to the Danes. That's what they've been pushing for. But it's true that the feeling in Copenhagen is that if the United States moves into Greenland, takes control of it, well, the Danes will have nothing else to do but to pull out. And if they pull out, that is going to be very bad news for the people of Greenland, because everything in Greenland comes from Denmark. The food is imported in. There's no agriculture there. The only thing that the Greenlanders, the Inuits, only 57,000 people, they depend on the fishing industry, but there is no agricultural industry at all in the country. Everything comes from Denmark, and the health system comes from Denmark as well. So if all of the Danes, the Danish backing pulls out, then the country will collapse. Is the United States interested in that? I'm not sure that is a high priority on the US's agenda. What they want is to take control of Greenland for military purposes, to protect the United States, and also to get their hands on raw materials in Denmark. So that's a very worrying position for the actual residents in Greenland themselves. And that's why there's such a huge number of Greenlanders who are not in favor of the United States taking control. Only 6% of Greenlanders, when asked, say they favor a US takeover, although a much greater number of Greenlanders would like independence from Denmark, but they're not looking for another country to take over control if the Danes are to pull out.
Stefan, Wolff, your thoughts on how the Europeans are playing it? And remember, we saw those images on Tuesday evening of all those European leaders here in Paris alongside Donald Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
I think the Europeans have to tread a very careful line here. Obviously. I mean, there are a lot of things at stake for European security at the moment. There's still quite a strong fear of American abandonment that the Europeans want to avoid. And above all, I think they are very clear that they do not want to necessarily irritate Trump. That said, I also think that it is right to actually put out some very clear red lines here that the Europeans would not be willing to see crossed. Now, we are not talking here the mutual defense clause of the Treaty on European Union and potentially a war between the US and Europe. But I think there would be very serious implications, including for US national security. On the one hand, I mean, Greenland is only one part of Arctic security. Arctic security extends to Iceland, it extends to Norway. So from that perspective, I mean, the US would be very well advised to actually think about alliance options in the North Atlantic more generally. And also, as we have just seen, the US still depends, to some extent at least, on good defense cooperation with Europe. I mean, the tanker near Iceland was seized with operational support from the United Kingdom. If it really comes to some sort of blows over Greenland, if the NATO alliance disintegrates, I mean, what would happen to all of those joint command structures? What would happen with US military forces based in Europe? what would ultimately happen with US abilities to project forth beyond the Western Hemisphere. So I think all of these are things that need to be considered. And I think it's quite important also to see that obviously there is already some pushback in Congress. The United States administration under Trump is not as united as it might seem. And I would also doubt that the Pentagon is particularly in favor of dismantling military alliance structures that have grown over the past decades into helping the US to become and remain for a very long time the preeminent military power in the world.
One quick final question for you, Stefan. Is this great power policy being redrawn by the United States or performative politics? I mean, we're showing on our channel those images fed to us by the Trump administration of ships being seized. It almost looks like an action movie. Is that what this is?
Yes, I think there is a lot of performance in here, but these performative actions also, of course, send signals, and they are sending signals. In the case of the seizure of the tanker, very clearly signals to Russia. The capture of Maduro signals to Russia, to China, but also to Maduro's allies in Latin America, for example. And I mean, the moves over Greenland, and again, I mean, this goes back to 2019 when Trump brought this up first. He had visits by Vice President Vance and one of Donald Trump's sons to Greenland last year. I mean, all of this is performative, but in this performance lie very clear indications also of what the US is actually thinking and where it might be heading. So in this sense, I think we need to take this seriously, but not to the extent that we are allowing ourselves to slip into some hysteria or panic over it.
Stefan Wolff, many thanks for being with us from Birmingham. I want to thank Fraser Jackson, our correspondent in Washington, Philip Turle. We're talking about the U.S.'s Monroe Doctrine for the 21st century. It's a claim on the entirety of the Americas where the European Union still wants a faster way in. The EU agriculture ministers are meeting in Brussels as we speak with an eye to sealing a free trade deal with the Mercosur South American bloc. As you can see from these images, it's come up with resistance from French farmers who are dead against. Thus, it's a reluctant Italy that could be the one in the end that seals the deal.